Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for the great turnout this morning, and as well the folks that are following online. We're actually switching things up a little bit. My name is Mike Collado. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for SOLiD, where we keep people connected and safe through a portfolio of commercial cellular and public safety DAS, as well as optical transport for backhaul and front haul. It's easy, given our haircuts, how you would confuse Chief Perdue with myself. We have a great segue. Some of the last couple questions really teed up the public safety talk very nicely. And the last question regarding how does DAS manifest in a hospital, and where does public safety fit in? And public safety in a hospital is pretty quintessential. So, not only are you supporting the commercial cellular, but you have the private two-way radios that are used by the staff on site within the hospital that are covered by a DAS system, as well as the first responders that are bringing patients in and out of the facility. These DAS systems, these in-building systems, are very important in a healthcare situation, and SOLiD certainly has its share of clients, including Kaiser Permanente and Parkland Hospital, among some others. SOLiD as well is providing the DAS for the MBTA that Joe Mullen will talk about here in just a couple minutes. We're also on various college campuses where, once again, you're sending your kids off to college. You're expecting to be able to reach your kids, but also that your children are going to be safe, to be able to be communicated, to call for help, to be able to receive information in the event of an emergency. College is not in addition to college campuses, stadiums. There'll be a presentation later today about Super Bowl facilities, and one of SOLiD's customers is the Daytona International Speedway. Later in the day, Alex Gamada, our friend from American Tower, that's a project that SOLiD's done. Again, you've got this influx of people that need to be able to communicate and call for help should they need to call for help, and respond to instructions regarding any emergency situation. That continues to translate into other industry verticals that SOLiD plays in: office buildings. The Ronald Reagan building is one of our buildings, and the middle prize, which was talked about in the earlier session. The middle prize being the enterprise, the smaller buildings that are between 100 and 500,000 square feet. Once again, I do want to thank the FCC for inviting SOLiD back. We were here 4 years ago where my colleague presented a very simple premise about public safety, that public safety is about the ability for the general public to be able to receive communications in the event of an emergency, to be able to call for help in the event of an emergency, and for the first responders, the fire and police and EMS, to be able to communicate inside of a building during an emergency. And really that became the foundation for the Safer Buildings Coalition, which Chief Perdue heads up. Essentially, it was a call to action for the industry, the wireless communications industry, as well as public safety and other stakeholders, to come together to solve for what is essentially a life safety system. You consider the fact that the majority of calls originate and terminate inside of a building. The fact that the majority of emergency cases occur inside of a building. There's a need to solve for that, and SOLiD's focused a lot of attention on that, and it's something that we can apply technology to solve. In fact, last year we published a ebook called The Imperative. The Imperative basically is a view that looks at how does the public and how does public safety interact in order to make buildings safer. I have a couple of slides here. I'd like to just briefly share a couple of revelations that we uncovered over the last 4 years of presenting at industry conferences such as this, and in the writing of the public safety imperative. And number one is, and I think I've already set that up, is that we need to keep in mind when it comes to public safety that there is the public in public safety. That's you and me. That's you and me to be able to, once again, to communicate and receive information. Wireless is essentially a life safety system, and we're carrying that on each of, through our smartphones. Secondly, I'd like to call attention to a paradigm shift. Often we think about solving for wireless communications with an outside-in approach. Given the fact that the majority of calls originate and terminate indoors, the fact that most of the emergency calls and incidents occur indoors, I think we recommend and observe that there's a need to change the paradigm from public safety not being a last mile problem, but a first mile solution. And in-building plays an important role in that. A third observation is, and this is truly the elephant in the room, and I think I was talking with Don Johnson before the panel about one of the biggest problems with public safety is that the people that need it most don't have the budget. And I know that in DC we're all full aware of the FirstNet initiative with $7 billion allocated to build a new public safety broadband network, and $7 billion sounds like a lot of money. But the fact is that commercial operators are spending $7 billion each year simply to maintain their network. So it's really not the carriers that are going to need to pay for this, it's the building owners. Building owners, from a leasing perspective, the ability to provide a safe building in order to attract tenants, it's paramount that we understand that the building owners are the ones that are going to fund these, and building and business models will similarly emerge. We touched earlier in the other session about convergence, and I think it's attractive and for us to think about converging public safety with commercial cellular from a business perspective. It's a neat way to layer on a solution to a commercial cellular DAS. However, the reason that I would argue that commercial cellular and public safety today should not be converged is technical. Public safety requires about a fourth of the infrastructure needed in order to provide the wireless coverage compared to LTE. In the future, with LTE and and the FirstNet initiative, which is an LTE public safety broadband network, convergence could become an attractive option, but generally today you're going to do a separate layer for public safety. And lastly, and as a way to tee up Chief Perdue here, we would observe that codes are complicated. They're not uniform. We were speaking earlier this morning with some of the attendees here that you have two code-making bodies, and each AHJ, that is the authorities having jurisdiction, can cherry pick from a code and adopt whatever language that they want. That informs that it's impossible to have a repeatable process. If you're a real estate investment trust, a REIT, and you have a portfolio of buildings to solve for, not having uniform codes whereby your neighboring jurisdiction has different code language makes it very difficult to create a repeatable process to deploy and solve and comply with those codes. So we would argue that some good work has been done. In Florida, Bill 535 was passed in March. That is a code that requires new and existing buildings to meet minimum requirements. However, I think a lot more work is yet to be done. I think that's an area where Chief Perdue and his organization have been focusing a lot of attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Again, it's an honor to be here and speak for the FCC and represent Safer Buildings Coalition, which is a public-private not-for-profit partnership that's dedicated to education and advocacy as it relates to in-building. I'm going to throw two numbers out, 70% and 64%. 70% are the number of 911 calls that come from a cellular mobile device. 64% of that 70% come from indoors. So having the capability to call for help when an emergency occurs is critical for in-building. It's not a nice thing to have, it's a necessity. People expect that. There's a public expectation. So it's relevant to how we do business today. A question was asked earlier in the earlier panel about what are property owners doing? If property owners aren't taking care of this situation, they're not going to have tenants because tenants are expecting coverage in buildings. And we see that in some of the work we're doing with REITs and property owners and others. One of the things I want to talk about is three things we look at is, one, can you call for help when you have an emergency? Number two is, can we push information to you? Mike mentioned college campuses. One of the things I often talk about is an active shooter event at a college, a university. Part of their plan is we're going to notify the student populace that there's an incident taking place. How do they do that? Text message. What if you don't have coverage? The plan has zero value. So it's critical that we look at that. We talk about shopping centers and events that are taking place there in our world today that we live in. This happens constantly across the U.S. and the world. So we've got to find a way to get coverage inside buildings. And the third piece is, when we respond, public safety. I spent 36 years active response in public safety and now do some administrative stuff, public safety. Can we communicate when we get there? I've been on the scene where I'm trying to talk to our personnel inside a building and I can't communicate. You know, I often say we can talk to people on the moon and watch them get there, and I can't talk to firefighters inside a building. I'm standing in the street. How do we overcome that? It's by industry working together with public safety and developing solutions, and DAS happens to be one of those solutions that's available. We have to find a way to make it cost effective that building owners can put this in their building and it becomes part of the life safety ecosystem of that building. I say that because fire sprinklers are in the majority of the buildings you go in. Fire alarms are in the majority of the buildings you go in. So I want to do a quick history lesson. In 1878, fire sprinklers were invented. In 1896, the first fire sprinkler code was adopted here in the developed and adopted here in the United States in some areas. Now, I translate that to in-building requirements, which are now in the code. In 2009, in-building became a requirement for public safety systems. So you have to put those in areas that are adopted, whether it's through the International Fire Code published by the International Code Council or NFPA 1221, which is published by the National Fire Protection Association. Those things are becoming more and more uniform. In the fire sprinkler industry, in the first 4 years that the sprinkler code was there, 200,000 sprinklers were installed. In 2002, 35 to 40 million fire sprinklers were installed. This is coming. Public safety is here, whether you want it to be a part of it or not. Public safety is here. Public safety is going to stay. And it's imperative that we have the public to be able to communicate and public safety communicate during those emergencies. Thank you.
Yeah. My first question is, do you see any limitations in a DAS system responding to first responders? I'm thinking about like stairwells, garages. Are there any limitations that are of particular concern?
The code is very specific on the coverage requirements. 99% in stairwells, fire
Right.
pump rooms, and areas where public safety are at. 95% coverage throughout the remainder of the building so that we have that capability. And those systems have to be tested on the initial installation and then annually thereafter and monitored through the fire alarm system to ensure capacity.
I would just add that's a key differentiator. Typically in a commercial cellular DAS or in-building solution, you're not going to deploy in the stairwells,
Right.
and those, but those are essentially really important areas where the fire service does their work.
Okay, we have a question from the audience. Question is from Ken, and this is for Chief Perdue. The NFPA requirements for coverage extensions are very voice-centric. What efforts are underway to extend NFPA code to include FirstNet's LTE data network? It is a future public safety mission critical voice platform.
Excellent question. One of the things, I just attended code hearings in Kentucky week before last, and we've submitted a proposal that includes data, voice and data as part of that component. We have some education to do amongst ourselves, our peers that serve on the fire code hearing committees, both in the ICC and the NFPA process. But there's work to do, and we have to include that because it is part of the critical communication systems public safety utilizes.
Okay. Thank you, Chief.